They are tall, name-checked by the Egyptians, and are incredibly dark-skinned, even compared to other Africans. Though a lot of people in the past knew them as Sudan, they are not one group. Instead, they have many tribes existing between them. But as diverse as they are, they seem to have occupied the Nilotic regions, and really no further for the longest time, as their DNA does not really overlap with other people, with the exception of the Ethiopians. A couple thousand years ago in the past, they were pushed out of their regions near Egypt and made to move further south faster and faster because of the drying of the desert. Even today, there's obvious evidence of people who lived in that area where there's just desert today and cattle and feeding areas, showing that at one time this deserty area was a healthy environment. The Dafufa, one of my favorite structures that I've seen before, simply because it shows that they had their own style that had nothing to do with ancient Egyptians, is first and foremost a beautiful structure, but secondly, is a structure that shows you that deep in the desert, you find this big thing that you could be like, why would they put it there? Why would they stand in the middle of the desert and just have it? But in actual fact, it wasn't a desert at one point, and the greenery went away due to the sun. Let's for a second compare these Africans to other Africans. We find that most Africans who live in the equator tend to be very tall, but as soon as you start going down, you start getting very short people and very light skinned people at the same time. And so it's not that these people have nothing to do with each other, it's just that their environmental adaptation is quite different, which is why it is so specific to that region that Egyptians and Nubians lived and seem to display certain features which are well built for that desertification of that region. And so, how long have they been battered back and forth by the desert and its ever moving sun's rays? Since the beginning of the ancient Egyptians, the establishment of relationships between the ancient Egyptians and the Nubians was fully seen, admitted, and loved by the ancient Egyptians. It was extremely lucrative for them. Again, another surprise given the fact that the Nubians and the Egyptians spent so much time together, but you don't see this half crossbreed thing that is very big in the Sudanese regions. You would think the ancient Egyptians would plug their own people into an area where they get the majority of their gold, and leaving it to a foreign people forever seems very, very strange. Here's a theory. What if they didn't do that? What if they did go into Egypt, and what if they did go into Nubia and they tried to set up their own people there? But because the people are of a similar race, you can barely tell the difference. Zulnun al-Masri and Jahiz would have both represented this type of physical appearance and this type of people, even though they were both Arabs, so to speak. Another one of their kind, though living thousands of years before Zulnun and Al-Jahiz, is Nehesi. Nehesi means the Nubian, and it's thought that his mother was a Nubian, but his father was an Asiatic living in Egypt, and that when they came together, they had a kid, and the kid was called the Nubian based on his appearance. Now it's possible that his father was actually a Egyptian and his mother was a Nubian. But we do know that his name means the Nubian. By the way, he's not the only person in the past. Even in the Bible, there are people who are called the Niger. I'll say the word like that, but there's ones who are called the Niger, meaning the black. It's an Italian word, by the way. And there are other people, just it's all over the show, where people in the Middle East are called the black. And this is because really dark skinned people exist in that region as far as Asia. So, what is it about this group that is so special compared to the others? Well, it's because they're part of ancient history in a way that is written down, and shows that their black people were part of the facts of the world. And of course, when I say black people, I mean it with no exception. These are not light skinned black people. These are true black people. And there's a reason why people have a problem with these, because when people write about them, they write about them being steeped in darkness. So they leave no room for vagaries about who they were. This is why there's so many people trying to look for DNA in Nubia that will make the Nubians not black anymore, even though they've shown us warlord after warlord trying to prove that Nubians were these really dark skinned people. Now they want to prove that Nubians were not dark skinned for the same reason why they wanted to prove that the Egyptians weren't dark skinned. Must stay vigilant, make sure you don't believe this. Okay, but so here's the question. If all Egyptians were dark skinned and Nubians were dark skinned, why is it that he's called Nehesi? Well, it's because of the Hyksos invasion. So the Hyksos invade Egypt and they take parts of Egypt and they rule it. And this is the part where Nehesi is born, showing you, by the way, that Nubians were not stuck in the bottom of Egypt. And when they rule this region, they intermarry with the locals. And this is an example of an intermarriage, not only with someone who's just whatever. This person is called Nehesi, meaning that they're Nubian. They're not just intermarrying with Egyptians, they're marrying with Nubians as far as they're showing in this text. And so the Nubians and the Hyksos marry and formulate something little different. Now, the Hyksos, by no stretch of the imagination, were the majority. Still, the ancient Egyptians were the majority, and the Nubians, Nubians not meaning just black, meaning people who lived in the regions that would be considered Nubia and migrated into Egypt, would be the second largest population. Then the Hyksos would be the third largest population. But as you can see here, they had no problem interbreeding, and so they would have been bred out of the region. And even more than that, at later dynasties they would be kicked out, and some of their names would be scratched out as not real Egyptian kings. Because of course, they're not. This orange area here depicts where the Hyksos took over. Avarice was the first place, and you can see that Nehesi as well was from Avarice. And so it shows you how far Nubians would have gone into the area. And this is again the 14th dynasty. This Think about it, this is one dynasty away from the female pharaoh that I talked about in the 12th dynasty. So you have the 12th dynasty, you have one dynasty after that, which caused such destabilization that the Hyksos just take over. Again, it's not just that simple. There's also the problem that the Asiatics were starting to strengthen, not to mention that Nubians were coming in from the south, causing real problems. And the Egyptians were wedged between enemies. there's also Libyans coming in from the other side. So people are just pouring in. This is why I laugh sometimes when people say they found DNA going back as far as 2000 BC. Like, well, of course you're gonna find some DNA dating back then. There were people, we know that the Hyksos and other people like that were there. But keep looking, and if you can't find more black DNA, then I will tell you that the ancient Egyptians themselves must be the most hardcore liars on earth, because they don't depict a land of just Asiatics. In fact, they make Asiatics seem like they're almost nowhere.